Herzlich willkommen zu einer neuen Folge des Podcasts Gain to the Power of Three. Der Podcast, der dir hilft, dass du mit eigener Muskelkraft durch den Sport, den du liebst, leben kannst. Gemeinsam mit Experten unterhalte ich mich über die 3 wichtigen Themen für eine erfolgreiche Vermarktung im Profisport: Presse, Sponsoren und den Profisportler selbst. Today the podcast guest is going to be Tim Godfrey. This episode is presented by Schloss und Kammer, Swiss Life Select and Steuerberater Matusek, and now let's jump right into it. Today, I'm very excited to have Tim Godfrey on the show. Tim Godfrey is Chief Marketing Officer at Professional Triathlete Organizations. For those who don't know, Tim will introduce it probably when his time to talk arises. But for now, it's an organization made from professional triathletes for professional triathletes, which helps to grow the sport of triathlon and make it an exciting sport to watch. It's golf and tennis with the ATP and all that stuff has been a great role model for the PTO. And I'm really excited what they've already been doing and what is gonna come now. So I'm really excited to talk about the background of the marketing strategy with Tim Godfrey today. Let's just start with a short introduction. Please introduce yourself and tell us about your background.
Thanks, Nicholas. You explained the PTO very well there. So you've obviously done a lot of research and are very passionate about triathlon, which is great. So thank you for having me on the podcast. My name is Tim Godfrey. I'm CMO at the PTO. I've been in the sports media market now, too long than I care to remember, but it's probably about 12 or 13 years now. I originally started my career a long time ago, actually, and I was doing a sports internship at CNN in London, and that was really the catalyst for my career in sport. And then from there, obviously, I went to university and studied media and marketing communications. And throughout that time, I was working for a company called Setanta Sports when they first started covering the English Premier League football. So during university, I was kind of moonlighting, as they say, trying to gain some experience in the sports world within the Premier League. So that was fantastic and gave me another introduction to the sport. And then I left university and went to work for ITN in London, which is one of the biggest kind of news production organizations. They produce the news in the UK here for Channel 4, for ITV and Channel 5, and they also have a production company. And then from there, I was hooked on the media market and content production and how all that business works of sending news around the world, and that was really my grounding in the industry. And kind of from there, I was really passionate about sport. So from there, I went to Sky Sports News, which is the 24-hour rolling news channel. And there I went to Endemol, which is an entertainment production company. They used to produce the likes of things like Big Brother and Total Wipeout. And we created a sports business at Endemol. And that then took me around the world to places like the Middle East. In Abu Dhabi, I lived there for 3 years, and we built the English Premier League, Arabic sports channels. And then from there, I came back to the UK and worked for a company called Perform Group, and then to Formula E after that, which was the new electric motorsport series. And that really was, I would say, the most exciting time in my career, apart from now, obviously, in triathlon. But Formula E was a brand new concept. It was doomed to fail from the beginning in terms of people said, this is never going to work. It's electric vehicles. There's no sound. This is not the future. So there are a lot of naysayers who said that it was never going to work. But, we powered on through, and now it's, certainly one of the fastest growing sports media companies, organizations in the world. And I was there for 3 years, traveled globally, signing TV deals, distributing content around the world, trying to spread the message that electrification is fast coming to our shores, and people need to start believing in it. And so that was that was a huge role that was incredibly demanding, but extremely rewarding at the same time. And then from there, I went into the role at so then I went back to ITN, actually, where I started, and was helping to run their sports production business. So we were going out to clients like the PTO, like Formula E, to say, work with ITN, use our services to produce your content. And that introduced me to SailGP, where I went in as CMO to look after the media and marketing. And then fast track to now, Sam Renouf, the CEO of the PTO, called me up and wanted to take me to the PTO. And that's where I am today. I've been here for a year, just over a year now. And it's been, phenomenal introduction to a sport that I knew about, but wasn't that familiar with, but immediately saw the potential, in a sport that is really a sleeping giant, in the professional sports world. It has so much potential, and, the PTO is here to help realize that potential, working alongside the athletes doing it. So it's kind of a dream role, to be honest. It's a fantastic organization with some great people behind it, but, the real stars of the business is the athletes. So that's my very quick snapshot of my journey to the PTO.
It's truly obvious that you're bringing on very high expertise in marketing to the sport, but I'd also be interested in your own sporty side. So have you done any sport yourself? Are you currently doing sport? Have you now picked up triathlon when you work in it yourself?
Yeah, it's a question I now get asked all the time. So, when are you going to do your first triathlon? So I haven't done a triathlon. The most, I would say, endurance activity I've done would be a half marathon, which I did about 3 or 4 years ago. And then I would say in my early years growing up, I was mad into football. So that's all I was doing. I was playing it. I was coaching it. I'd go down the park to play. I was doing it on an amateur level. And that was my real passion growing up was football. So as was most people in the area that I grew up in, football is football. Everyone plays it. Everyone loves it. And then I guess I didn't play as much when I went to university. Naturally, either people really lean into the sports at university or kind of go off in a different direction. And so that's where I played less, but then really just got into fitness and, doing HIIT classes and, now, whether it's One Rebel or Barry's Boot Camp or any of the HIIT classes, I'll tend to do that. But it's time, if you're time poor, like I am, doing an hour HIIT every couple of days is probably enough for me at the moment. But certainly there's some pressure there to participate in a triathlon. So watch this space on that one.
But it's obvious that you also have a passion in endurance sports or sports in general. So you don't only know how to market the sport to make it attractive for athletes, but you also know what the athletes will feel. And this is a great basic for proper production to capture the emotions, which are such an important factor in triathlon. It's always this up and down, which is super exciting. And the PTO is doing a lot of stuff in that direction. But let's come back to your past experiences. You told us where you worked. Maybe the closest to the PTO currently was your experience in Formula E, which you already talked about is the fastest growing sport currently, and SailGP. So what specific learnings and experiences do you think from your past you have made that you now bring to the PTO, and why you think the or triathlon can get such a big hit and believe it's a sleeping giant which only needs to be awoken?
Great, really good question. I would say the first thing is what Formula E and the SailGP taught me was you need a thick skin in this business, right? So things are not straightforward. You always get a lot of people saying things can't work or this is not how it should be done. But as long as you have a very clear vision for what you want and you believe in it and you have a team of people around you that believe in that vision, you can achieve anything. And so that was really pertinent at Formula E because there was so much doubt about it. there was a lot of doubt about the technology, the underlying technology within the cars. Can you actually create a TV product out of this? Because are the cars going to last around the circuit? And there was lots of issues with it. But our CEO at the time, a very successful Spanish entrepreneur called Alejandro Agag, had a very, very defined vision of what he wanted to do. And that helped everybody along the way. It wasn't perfect. It probably still isn't perfect, after 7 years. But certainly after I was there for 3 years, the first 2 years were extremely difficult. We traveled to 12 locations around the world, transporting, all of these new single-seater electric cars, and, broadcasting in new locations around the world with an unproven broadcast model. I remember the first event in Beijing in 2014 was probably probably still is the most stressful time in my career, because, what could go wrong went wrong. And we nearly didn't get on air, but it's all of these things. They kind of stand you in very, very good stead going forward. And it was a very, very fast growing business that we all believed in. We aggressively bought into the culture and what electrification meant, not just for Formula E, but for the broader society. It has accelerated the adoption of electric cars. I think last year it was the first time that electric car sales were bigger than diesel car sales. So it's not all attributed to something like Formula E, but it shows you the power of sport. And that was really that was our marketing message, right? To begin with, was this new sustainable sport can kind of change the direction the world is going in, and it's still on that path. It's taken different paths to get there, but fundamentally the message was very clear. This is a new concept which is going to disrupt a very traditional market, and so my role specifically was to go and sell the television rights around the world and to create all of our short form content. And so again, we were learning as we were going. We were adopting new technologies, and so all of that experience in very condensed fashion, operating in different parts of the world. So, whether you're trying to operate in Beijing in China, or in Punta del Este in Uruguay, or in Miami in the States, culturally, it gives you a lot of awareness. And so, Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, there's not part of the world that we didn't go to. So that would be, the experience of Formula E has probably given me the most experience that I've had in my career, because it was so fast growing. And so I've taken a lot of that learning onto things like the PTO and to SailGP.
To have you now on board with the PTO is really interesting, especially with what you said about Formula E. In the first race, it was everything that could go wrong went wrong, and it was super difficult to even get it on air. And after the Collins Cup and after Miami, and not Miami, Daytona, there were quite a few criticisms and all that stuff. And to see the Formula E now being one of the fastest growing sports, just proves that you are able to improve, and you see these mistakes yourself and make the best out of them. So we've now talked quite a lot about yourself and know who you are and what you bring to the sport. But for all those listeners who are not in triathlon and not as excited about the PTO as I am, maybe it would be great to just give us a brief introduction about the PTO and also what the goals are for the next years.
Sure. Well, I guess the best way to describe the PTO to non-triathlon fans or people who don't know the sport is that we are really following in the footsteps of tennis and golf and darts, for example. They professionalized a long time ago, which means that the athletes themselves, the professionals that are competing, really take charge of the sport. So with the ATP in tennis, WTA in women's tennis, the PGA in golf, PDC in darts, the athletes get behind a single vision and take it forward in the direction that really benefits them and benefits the sport. And that's where the Professional Triathletes Organization was born. It was born in its current form 2 years ago. The athletes have united behind a single vision to grow the sport of triathlon, and to really elevate the athletes and give them the platform that their sporting exploits deserve. And so what predated and has predated the PTO is a mass participation sport, which is very amateur based. And then there's a group of professionals who go and compete at certain events and races where they can. But the fundamental business model behind triathlon has now changed, right? So the PTO has come in, it's professionalized it, it's brought proper economics to the sport. And that means creating, 5 major events a year, which is now coined as the PTO Tour. It's got proper broadcast, it will have proper production and distribution, which in turn will elevate the athlete's profile to a proper level. And I would say the key point, and is, listen, this thing is not just about economics and business, but we have injected the right money into the right areas of the sport, i.e. prize money and production. And so at our events, we will have the best athletes competing for the logical reason that they're competing for the biggest prize purse. And that drives then the competitiveness of the television product, which then in turn drives the stickiness of the audience coming back to watch that event because you've got the best of the best competing head to head. So what predated the PTO was a very fragmented mass participation, amateur-based sport, which has tried to professionalize in certain ways, but has never had the full backing of the athletes. And the athletes have never united in this way until now. And so we are taking this sport in the same direction as tennis, golf, and the other professional sports we've mentioned. And our North Star is to really create heroes and stars out of our main athletes, to really give them the platform to be successful. And I would say an extreme example of what we're doing is what UFC did with mixed martial arts. They professionalized that space, they consolidated it to find the ultimate fighter. And we want to do a similar thing, right? So they poured money into building out their characters. Conor McGregor is a globally known name now. The UFC is a globally named brand. It's, IMG and Endeavor purchased it for billions and billions of dollars. And that has really turned what was seen as a kind of a blood sport into professional sport. And it's an extreme example, but that really is where we're taking this.
For myself, it has always been that since coming into the sport, Ironman Hawaii was the event I was training for, to eventually, with 35 to 40 years, around the time when you're at peak fitness for long distance, to win that event. Do you think, because for the single reason that it was the biggest event out there, everyone was competing there, and I just wanted to prove to myself and prove to the world that when you set yourself to a goal, you can achieve it. And do you think with the PTO stepping into triathlon, from me, 35 to 40 years will be about 2037 to 2042. Do you still think my goal will be to win Ironman Hawaii? Or do you think the landscape of triathlon has changed so dramatically that the event everyone's anticipating, everyone's looking for, and also the pros want to compete, and because everyone's there, will be a PTO event? What do you think?
That's a cracking question. It's interesting because obviously I've come into the sport, and Ironman, Hawaii, Kona, these names have been told to me. It has less meaning to me, if that makes sense. So I know about it, but it has less meaning to me as a business individual who is trying to achieve the vision within the PTO in terms of our goals, right? So in 20 years, if we have consolidated our events, right, and we have a very successful event structure, and our athletes are doing well, they're earning the money that they should be, our broadcasters are happy, and we're developing and pushing forward the sport, it doesn't really matter to us, right? We sit very agnostically within triathlon because we're the athlete body. So actually we want Ironman, Hawaii, Kona to be absolutely very successful, right? Because it helps the sport. And, another example would be Super League Triathlon is a fantastic new format, right? Which is condensed the sport into a short course format made for TV. Our athletes go and compete in Super League. It's great because ultimately they get more profile and they can earn more money from it as well. So I don't know what will be the signature event, I guess, is the answer. But all I guess we hope for is that triathlon continues to move in the right direction and has the right kind of thesis and the right, philosophy behind it, right? And we believe we can do that through being the athlete body and the athletes being united. The Collins Cup, has the potential to be a very flagship event. So who knows what the Collins Cup looks like in 20 years? It would be phenomenal if that was to be a signature event. The other way to look at it is from a non-triathlon perspective. Formula One is always seen, and it will always be seen as the pinnacle of motorsport. So if you were, a budding, go-karter who, wanted to move up the ranks within that space, the top of that is Formula One. I'm not sure that will ever change, right? Because of the legacy it has, the history it has. And so, sport develops in different ways. And so, take sailing and SailGP, the America's Cup is seen as the pinnacle of racing, inshore racing. SailGP has come along and disrupted that model, right? It's created a different concept for the modern day sports world. And so sport is evolving all the time. And that's the way it should go. And there's other examples of, things like tennis, tie-break tens, which is the short form version of tennis, has shortened the event. Will it ever be the absolute pinnacle of tennis? I'm not sure it will, purely because the Grand Slams are so entrenched in people's habits, right? And so, we hope to grow, in summary, the whole sport of triathlon, not just the PTO events. The PTO events are there, but we hope to grow the whole sport and make it even more successful than it is.
Yeah, what's really interesting what you're talking about is that it's not like in the past we had like challenge versus Ironman and all that stuff. And for the PTO, it's just about evolving triathlon as a whole. And if Ironman steps up to it, maybe it was the prize money for Ironman Hawaii, maybe in terms of a cooperation that the PTO might be qualifying events so the pros can focus on the PTO events but still have this legendary Ironman Hawaii. Who knows what will happen in the future, but it's also awesome that you're open to it and not like closed and we are gonna be the only event. And I mean, for me as a professional, really the saying of I want to win Ironman Hawaii is just I want to be on top of the world. So if that event changes with time, I don't really care. It's just the reasoning behind it. So I thought it was really interesting. But now let's get back to the involvement of the sport with a simple question. What are the strategic plans in marketing to reach the goals the PTO has set themselves?
Yeah, so I think it's fairly straightforward for the first kind of couple of years. Much like the other sports that I've worked in, we have to aggressively grow. And we have to have our product in the marketplace. So what that means is, last year we had the Collins Cup, which was one event, which was okay. But we can't remain only having one event. And that's why we've launched the PTO Tour. We launched that in December. And, we're now launching with age group racing as well at our events, which we should get onto later. But, the strategic vision here is to create a media and marketing product. And with that, we have to have our events. And so, when we're up to full specification on our events, our calendar, we will have the PTO Canadian Open, the PTO US Open, the PTO Asian Open, and the PTO European Open. And then we will have the Collins Cup. So there will be our 5 majors. And around that event framework, which will be the PTO Tour, we will create media and marketing, which will consist of obviously the live broadcast at every single one of those events. We will have our highlights product. We will have preview and reviews, which all get distributed to the world's biggest broadcasters. But I guess I would say the most important thing for us over the next couple of years is to grow the profiles of our professional athletes. And by that, we created Beyond Human in the first year, which was a fantastic success, which focused on Lionel Sanders, Heather Jackson, and Sebastian Kienle. We will do another version of that this year. And that will really help us outside of the events, keep the interest level high. And so, as you know, like there's peaks and troughs within a year, where the Collins Cup, obviously we had a huge moment and we had a lot of interest, and then it comes down again. We want to avoid those down moments. And we do that via our content production team, who are creating all of this very engaging, personality-led content, which keeps the interest of our athletes top of mind for the whole year. And so in summary, we create 5 major events. We distribute them live globally to all sorts of different broadcasters, including Discovery and Eurosport, including Fox, including Sky New Zealand, including CBS outside, a whole variety of different broadcasters, which grows the sport. But then every single day of the year, we have a 365-day-a-year content plan, which builds the stars, which builds the athletes up as within our community, but also we want to grow the sport. So how do we make these athletes more personable, more human to the non-triathlon audience? And that's a long-term goal for us, but not necessarily immediately.
Very interesting. Now you talked a lot about about creating a broadcast product which will be distributed to different channels. So one income stream will definitely be the revenue you generate from selling these rights. Still, different sports, looking at football with in the stadium and all that stuff. There are a lot of different revenue streams that come in, and currently the PTO is truly investing a lot of money with prize purses over $1 million, probably 10 times of what we've seen in triathlon before. What will the different revenue streams be, and how do you build these up?
Yeah, it's a good question. Media rights will be a revenue stream for us, and whether that's directly from our broadcasters or whether that will be more of a direct-to-consumer proposition that we will look at in time. So media rights would be one, sponsorship will be the other. And the way we create sponsorship revenue is by providing a platform for those sponsors to tell the stories of their brand. We do that by distributing our live TV product globally and by having a very relevant product for a lot of brands out there. Host city fees would be another one. And so really they're the 3 main revenue streams into the PTO. And those revenue streams will kind of develop over time. But as you know, we are very well capitalized. We're very well funded. And so we're not under pressure right now, right, to have money incoming. As with any startup, there's lots of money going out the door, but it's going out the door for the right reasons in terms of we have the ability to make the right decisions and the right investments for a longer term gain, a longer term kind of strategy. And so, yeah, I guess in summary, we're putting the building blocks in place, the right building blocks in place is to make sure that those revenue streams are coming in.
How important do you think merchandising will be?
Yeah, good question. That's something that we are developing, and we should have some news on that pretty soon in terms of what our strategy will be on that. It's obviously a major revenue stream for other players in the market, and we won't be any different, although it hasn't been an immediate focus for us because we've had to get so many other things off the ground.
Okay, very interesting. Let's get back to the different revenue streams you're focusing on right now. Selling the media rights is quite obvious, and also no matter if that's to a distributor or to direct to customers, But what I think is really interesting is sponsorship. Of course, it can be a really good and solid income streams. It already is for many different sports, but I haven't yet seen any sponsors, to be honest, directly as part of the PTO. Okay. Can you tell me about what is planned in terms of sponsorship?
Sure. Well, for the Collins Cup, you would have seen we had, Tag Heuer were our timing partner. We had Zwift as our training partner. We had Wahoo in transition. Tiffany's made our trophy. And so, we had sponsorship deals for the Collins Cup. But you're right in saying that there have not been any direct sponsorship deals with the PTO, as an organization. But now what we've done is we've created that sponsorship vehicle, if you like, with the PTO tour and our events, right? So it's all kind of linked together in that, we hope somebody will come in and sponsor the PTO tour as a title of the PTO tour, right? And so that will be something that we're going to market with at the moment. And then the single events as well. And so you could sponsor, Nicholas Ludwig could sponsor the PTO US Open, for example. Or you could sponsor the PTO Canadian Open. And then there's various other...
I will win these events. I don't need to sponsor
Exactly.
them.
Well, there you go. There you go. You'll be an honorary guest at our events. And so we have the bigger tiered sponsorship opportunities, which we're targeting to a very, I would say, tailored list of businesses that we think would be interested in that. And then we have the more endemic partnership opportunities, i.e. swim, bike and run, nutrition and recovery. So they're the more, they are the brands that are kind of maybe already affiliated with the sport. And so a more natural fit. The other sponsorship opportunities are much bigger and they're much harder to sell, right? Because we're a newer business. We're trying to prove that we're going to be here and we're not going to, stop in the next couple of years. This is a long-term business, long-term goals. And we believe that it's a very valuable audience ultimately that we are broadcasted to, and a very engaged audience and a very affluent audience. And so it's a very good question you ask about how we're doing that. If you look at golf, I think pre the pandemic, there was $1.6 billion of sponsorship in golf. And in the same year, there was $50 million US dollars of sponsorship in triathlon. And so you see the market opportunity for sponsorship is huge. It's just that triathlon has never consolidated its product into a sponsorable asset for those brands to put their arms around and sponsor and tell their brand stories. So for sure, it's a long-term goal for us. As I said, again, we want to make the right choices in this space. So we're not under pressure to do that, but it certainly is a key revenue stream for us moving forward.
So coming back to my question with not having seen sponsors yet, I must admit I have seen them, but I just didn't recognize them as sponsors. But what was really interesting as well, what you talked about was the potential customers of the product. I know that about 92% of the Ironman finishers have studied on a university. And do you think the same? And I think on Ironman Hawaii, it's the average person who finished Ironman Hawaii has a household income of $150,000. So it could be really, really interesting for major brands like maybe Porsche, maybe Breitling, maybe Rolex. There could be so many different luxury brands which are interested to engage with the sport. But do you think the same audience which is currently reached in terms of doing events themselves will be the people who will also be attracted by the broadcasting, or will that differ?
Yeah, it's a very intelligent question, to be honest. And part of because we're so new in this, right? We've had 2 events, if you include Daytona, And so we have a bit of data now, and it is definitely moving in that direction. So there is a link between the participants and the audience, right? And I guess that will become more apparent as we create a TV product that is good enough, that tells the stories in the right way, that has the right technology to make that even more so, right? So all of those finishes at Ironman, all of those finishes at the challenge events, like they should be watching, right? They should be watching the professionals compete, right? As me, as a football fan, as a amateur football player, I would want to watch the Premier League. Why? Because they're the best, they're the most elite players in my interest, and it's produced in an unbelievably compelling way. And I can consume it where I want it, when I want it, on demand. It's a media product that is fit for the fan. And that's ultimately, where we're taking this, right? That's no secret. We are creating a media proposition that your generation, will be able to consume on a daily basis, and get inside the stories of the professionals, of the elites, right? Which then in turn inspires you, right, to carry on competing. And so, yes, 100%, that is a huge area that we need to connect, is the affluent participant base, the affluent fan base with the media product. And in turn, then that creates that sponsorship value for, let's say, a JP Morgan or an Amex or one of the big financial institutions to wrap their arms around the sport, and be able to, tell their brand story to a very relevant fan base.
Yeah, that will be very interesting, because that also makes it more interesting for those companies to also partner up with the professionals, which also directly creates money for the professionals themselves. So it's a lot of exciting things which are happening. So as we are talking through this podcast, I think everyone now gets why I'm so excited as an upcoming professional for what you're doing. So we had some slight internet problems. We'll just get right back into the action with a question about the host city fees. I wanted to ask, how does that exactly work? So obviously, you gain money from the host city, like Dallas, pays you money, but do you also gain additional money through sales which are on the race course, just like sales from drinks and food and all that stuff, or is that then the money the city gets?
So I think every deal is different, right? That's the first thing to say. There is no kind of cookie cutter deal, if that makes sense. So no deal is the same with a host city, and actually no deal is the same from a broadcast standpoint either. But host cities want to ultimately bring major international events to their city, right? And in order to do that, they need to pay for the privilege for someone like the PTO or Formula E or SailGP or Formula One or some of the tennis events, golf events to come to their city with all of the broadcast production, all of the athletes, all of the infrastructure. And that's what, something like the PTO will bring to the party in Edmonton or in Dallas or in Slovakia. We will bring all of that investment. And in return, obviously, sometimes there will be a payment from the host city, and in return, what do they get? They get people coming to their city. They get their city broadcast globally over, television networks. They get people buying hotel beds. They get people in their restaurants. It's ultimately an economic impact, which something like the PTO has on a particular destination. And those deals are all different. And they were different at FE. The economics are different in terms of the levels, and the pricing is different. But yeah, for sure, that's a long-term revenue stream for us.
To further embrace the topic of revenue, or you want to obviously grow the revenue streams, each one of them in the future, it's super important. What you already told about is to create content that excites people. So let's just start with the brainstorming process of that.
Sure.
How does the brainstorming project of creating content, coming up with new ideas, coming up with races work? Because right from the beginning, I think an important factor is that it's exciting for TV.
Sure. So yeah, in terms of the brainstorming process, it is, we have a team here of, we have a head of content, we have social media editors, we have producers who will, and communications professionals who will look at, what are the most compelling stories that we can tell? Who are they? Who are the individuals within our sport that we want to talk about? And then look at, the processes in which we go about producing that content. So Beyond Human was an idea conceived by the PTO. So we came up with that idea that we wanted to produce a documentary series, and then actually it was physically produced by an external agency called Noah Media Group, who are a very renowned international production company who have produced stuff for Netflix and Amazon and BBC, ITV. They did a very famous documentary most recently called 14 Peaks on Netflix. So we're working with, best-in-class production companies to bring the stories alive of our athletes. And that's a very difficult role. It's not about just sticking a camera in front of Lionel Sanders and all of a sudden he comes to life. It takes time to build up that trust and relationship with our athletes. And I think we've done that. We've still got work to do. I think the big moment for us was the Unbreakable series, which was actually done in-house. That was done entirely by the PTO, and was, I would say, a very good introduction to what we want to do, right? We want to tell the stories of the athletes in a compelling way, and make sure it's seen and heard by the widest possible audience. And again, that will take time, but the brainstorming process is challenging, right? Because it's not always staring at you in the face. Like, what is the most compelling story? It's not often the obvious one. And so it takes a lot of time. Most of the team here, they will spend time talking with the athletes, finding out more about them, and then finding out the way to produce them. And so, it always starts with with an open discussion on, right, what do we want to do this year? And so, it's a creative brainstorm process.
I could believe that there are some athletes, or there definitely are athletes who are like fan favorites, and there are probably also some who enjoy working with the media more than others do. And it probably is difficult. So everyone gets their fair share of content produced by the PTO. How do you handle that complication?
Yeah, it's a very difficult process. I would say from a marketing perspective, it would be very hard for us to focus on every single professional athlete, right? So we have to be very defined in our focus. If you look at the recent launch of our age group marketing and our age group event pages that we've launched for Collins Cup, the Canadian Open and the US Open, if you look at the faces, so for the US, we've got Sam Long and Taylor Knibb, in terms of front and center. And for the Canadian Open, we've gone with Lionel Sanders and Paula Findlay. Collins Cup, we've got our select group of athletes across the three teams. And so, one of my goals, with the PTO is, how do we make these names famous? So how does Sam Long become a household name globally in sport? That's not an easy task. It's a long journey, but something that we strongly believe in. He has the personality, he has the skills, he has the competitive edge. He wants to win. So all of these things, how do we make that valuable? How do we make that really relevant for the consumer? How do we make that relevant for sports fans around the world to want to watch him compete against the best of the best? So we have a very defined strategy in how we want to do that, but ultimately it's very long term. So this isn't something that is solved in the next couple of weeks. The Collins Cup was a big moment for those athletes, being kind of front and center. and to all of a sudden have that attention on them. And so, yeah, I'm trying to remember the original question there, but our attempt is to make our athletes famous, right? So that is our North Star. But we won't make all of them famous because that's just going to be impossible. So we have to focus in on the ones that have the most compelling stories, and hopefully then that's a catalyst for the rest.
You now talked about the story, which has to be exciting. Performance is probably also a very important indicator. What are the different indicators for which athletes or for which athletes you produce content?
Well, I think first of all, I would say, yeah, the performance element is absolutely crucial, right? As in any sport, Man United get more coverage than Burnley in the United Kingdom, right? That's because they have traditionally, not really now, but they've traditionally been the best team in the world, and the most successful team in the Premier League. And so there has to be a performance element to it. But then also there has to be a personality element to it. These characters have to be engaging. They have to want to put themselves out there. They have to want to tell their stories. But often it's, maybe it's the quieter athletes actually that have the best stories. So then it's about how do you produce them? How do you get those storylines out of them, and that they trust you to produce them in a trustful way, and in the right way. And so it's not always obvious, but they have to be good at their craft, right? Because ultimately, as a consumer yourself, as a participant, as a fan, you're not going to be interested in the person who doesn't do very well. Maybe you want to find out why they didn't do very well, but you want to ultimately aspire to be at the elite. So you look at the elite people in the game, or in the sport, and you focus on them. And that's really where we will focus a lot of our marketing efforts, in terms of that top level marketing. How do we bring the most people into the sport? But then, in contrast to that, the way we will produce our TV product from a live perspective will be a little bit more balanced, right? Because we want to follow all the stories within that event. Like the Collins Cup, 12 matches, gives you the ability to go and follow a match that is developing in a different way to the others. And so it's really, we follow the story, in most cases from a live perspective and a non-live perspective. And, we've seen recently with Drive to Survive, with what Formula One did, it was actually very interesting what was happening down the pack, down the grid, with the lesser known teams, right? And so we have to be aware of everything that's going on in the sport, to make sure that we can, track the journeys of those up and coming stars, as well as the ones that are already established. So Jan Frodeno, everyone knows him. He's a superstar, but fundamentally should actually be more well known outside of the world of triathlon than he is. And so how do we stop that happening? So with someone like Sam Long, when he gets to that level, what is going to be his exposure? And that's really what, we're providing that platform for.
Very interesting. You've now talked about as well on the field production, but also off the field production. And I would now focus on the off the field production, the content which just goes on each day of the year when nothing really special happens, on the different channels and how they differ. So what goes into the production of exciting content on different platforms, especially for YouTube, Instagram, or the website, and so on?
Yeah. So if I've understood your question correctly, I think, every single platform is different.
Yeah.
So that is fundamentally what you have to think about when you're producing content for those platforms. So YouTube is longer form content, and things like Instagram and, to some extent, Facebook, Twitter. Twitter is completely different. Twitter is reactive, it's newsy, it's conversational. And there's a specific tone for for Twitter as well. Whereas the other platforms, Instagram is very curated. It's beautiful images, it's very impactful. And things like, new platforms like TikTok and Snapchat have a different audience, slightly younger, And so there is content for all of those platforms, and the most successful sports media companies out there, whether you're the NBA or NFL, Formula One, they all have a bespoke content strategy for each platform. And often it will also be localized, right? So what you see in Germany is different to what you see in the United Kingdom, right? Because your viewing habits, your interests, the way you consume content is going to be different to somebody else, right? So it's how do you engage with your target audience in the best way possible. But clearly that's a lot of resources, a lot of budget, and there's a lot of consideration, there's a lot of time. And so again, we're not a finished product yet. So we are working towards that in terms of producing bespoke content for each platform, but there's a huge amount of thought that has to go into each one of those platforms. Like we haven't launched on TikTok yet. We haven't launched on Snapchat yet. The pure reason that we need the right resources in place to do that. So we wouldn't just produce and distribute content on those platforms without a considered strategy behind it.
Let's focus on a special documentary for now, and the production process of that. You told us that Unbreakable was first a documentary series which was completely produced in-house. Could you please walk us through the whole process from you came up with the idea to produce Unbreakable to the finished product, and how it's marketed after it goes online?
Yeah, sure. So it's a very, very simple process. We would talk with a select group of athletes who we want to feature. So in this case, the first series was, Ali Brownlee, Holly Lawrence, Paula Finley, Sam Long. There was a few others. We would discuss with them exactly what we want to do, what the vision of the series is, what the feature should be like. And then we would organize a film crew to go and sit down and film and interview them. So that would require somebody with a camera and sound equipment, and then also somebody to interview that person. In some cases, that may be done by the same person. But in most cases, you would have a kind of 2-person crew to go and film that content. Let's use Alistair Brownlee as an example. So we would go up there to Yorkshire, film with him, capture all of the content. We would bring it back into kind of PTO headquarters in London. We would edit it. We would produce it. It would go through a sign-off process whereby that content would be approved by somebody within the PTO. And then ultimately that would be then distributed across the PTO channels with a kind of social media marketing promotional plan in the background. So we wouldn't just put a bit of content out and hope for the best. There would always be a plan behind it. So we would seed it with the athletes. We'd make sure that there are visuals and images to go with it. There would be a paid marketing strategy to make sure the content is also seen outside of the PTO channels. And then we would replicate that with all of the athletes in terms of that we filmed with for the Unbreakables.
Very interesting. Thank you a lot. Nowadays, social media is such an important topic for athletes as well, and to share your own journey on it, on YouTube, on Instagram, and all that stuff. What do you think athletes can learn from the professionalism in production quality the PTO provides?
It's a very interesting debate, this, and it's not. I would say it's not a straightforward answer. Mainly because the world in social media and digital is changing on a daily basis. New habits are there every day. Consumers are thinking about new ways to interact. And so what I would say is that content coming from the PTO has its own look and feel, has its own flavor, has its own brand. Now, the content that then comes from the athletes, what do we want that to look like? Ultimately, they're their own people. They have their own voice. They're their own brand. Yes, they're part of the PTO, but ultimately we want their voice to be as authentic as possible. So the content coming from Lucy Charles Barkley, we want to be authentic to who she is, not necessarily content that, we will deliver them content for sure. We asked them to, they would have promoted the age group registrations being open and things like that. And, we want to encourage their audience to get involved with the PTO. But it's a fairly, I would say, organic process, right? Whereby they have to learn on a daily basis what works on their channels. And most of them, are starting to see that, right? Their audiences are starting to grow. But the Collins Cup, it was a good example whereby we produced an entire marketing campaign, not only for the PTO and our channels, but also for the athletes' channels. But every single bit of content that we delivered to the athletes was all bespoke to them. It was completely bespoke to Lucy Charles Barkley, where we had our images and we had words that describe Lucy Charles Barkley. And I think it was very successful. But there's a balance between what the rights owner passes to its assets and to its talent and what the athletes can produce themselves. And I would say, in a lot of cases, content that comes directly from the athletes that is just raw and emotional and just from their phone and just it's absolutely what they think will perform better than a branded bit of content that comes from the organizer ultimately. But there's a balance there. There's some messages that we want to get out via our athlete network that we will want to kind of control. But it's always a conversation with the athletes.
How do you generally think about social media as an athlete? Do you think it could hinder performance? Because obviously you're not just focusing on the sport, but also about marketing yourself and expressing your own voice.
Yeah, for sure. It's it's the modern day world, unfortunately, that they have to be able to balance. I think to be a successful individual brand and individual athlete, social media is part of that daily performance. It's part of that daily scheduling, whereby either the individual athlete is doing it themselves or they have somebody doing it for them. And for a number of reasons, that's connected to sponsorship agreements, it's connected to how they want to grow their own personal brand to be successful. And if it's quite rare now to have an athlete who is, let's say nearing the top of their game or at the top of the game, not to have a kind of social media presence, right? So everybody kind of has it to different levels of quality. And then it's about how important is it to you? How is it important to your financial situation? Does it hinge on sponsorship deals? All of these things they become very apparent. But I think, if you look in the English Premier League in this country, our footballers have been criticized massively, not for having an authentic voice, for having their channels ran by a PR team. So post a football match that maybe they've lost, there would be a tweet, on one of the players' channels, and it would be very structured, very PR comms driven, rather than actually coming from the athlete. And we're seeing that a lot, whereby agencies and PR companies are starting to say, right, we'll manage your social media for you. And that's, it's a difficult decision for them to make. And so on balance, there has to be figured out within their overall schedule. But it's hard, if you're a triathlete, you're training all of the time. You've got 3 disciplines, not just one discipline like most other sports. And so you're time poor, and so I think our athletes do a phenomenal job balancing the kind of, the demands of the modern day media world with what they have to do on, in terms of from a competitive standpoint. It's probably unlike any other sport in that regard.
Thank you a lot for the very interesting insights today. It truly was an incredible conversation, and I've learned a lot and gained a lot of insights into the PTO and what goes on behind the PTO in terms of marketing. We've by far not had time to talk about all the different topics. We didn't even come to Collins Cup and what you want to improve from there. We didn't talk about the athlete ranking and how important that is for marketing. There was so much more. You also wanted to talk about the age group ranking. So we would still have a lot of topics. So if you like this conversation and would like us to do a second episode, we'll see if we can make it happen sometimes in the future.
No problem.
But for now,
I'd be very, very happy to do a part 2. Nicholas. So just let me know.
That's awesome, because it was truly really good. I'll have to check how people like it, but I think it could work out very well. So thanks a lot for your time, and I'm looking forward, or I hope we'll do a second part, because I really enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed this episode just as much as I did, because for me it was really, really interesting to learn about what the PTO is up to and what they plan for the upcoming years. They probably are the only ones that can change my goal of winning Ironman Hawaii to something different, because there's just another race that is going to be more important. And something else which would be very interesting in this episode is, as this episode has again been in English, what your thoughts are about that. English episodes just allow me to create episodes with people who are not able to speak German, and most Germans are able to speak English. So I'd be interested if you had a problem with the podcast, or if you just enjoyed it as much as if it would be a German episode.